Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Praveen, and I work with Human Society International India as Disaster Preparedness Response and Relief Manager. Happy to be here, and here we are going to discuss about sphere standards in a very brief manner, which will help you to understand what exactly sphere standards is, the sphere handbook is, and how do you use it. So, what are how do you refer to the standards, and what are the ways which will help you to uh, practice and do more studies with it. So I have a presentation here. I will share the presentation and I'll switch my video meanwhile. So as you can see in the screen, Sphere Standards 2018 edition. So first edition came in the year 1998, then again in 2000, and then 2004 got revised in 2011 again, and the last revision was done in 2018, which we have currently available. And what exactly these standards talk about? So it is as it was created by a group of humanitarian professionals who are from non-governmental organizations and also the Red Cross and Red Crescent movement 1997, basically to improve the quality and humanitarian response and be accountable for their actions. So it is lied upon two core beliefs. The first one is people affected by disaster or conflict have the right to life with dignity and therefore the right to assistance. And all possible steps should be taken to alleviate human suffering arising out of disaster conflict. So people affected by a disaster doesn't happen by, so they have basically they have the right to get assistance, and they have the right to be treated with dignity. So we as humanitarian professionals who chose this profession to serve the people who are affected with disasters should ensure that it is their right to get that assistance, and with the dignity they deserve, we should provide them. And we should ensure that it is being provided in such a way. You can review the past disaster experience you have encountered to, or the case studies or the documents you have, to see if these rights are being given to them or not. So here the handbook discuss about various things, as you can see in the table. So how do we assess the trends over time? How do we analyze and prioritize them, review the options and decide how the response will be delivered, and design a program built on quality and accountability? The handbook has the following chapters in it. So first of all, it explains what is Sphere. By Sphere, it means the Sphere project. Later on, it was termed as Sphere, and how where they will discuss about how it got emerged and how the handbook can be used, uh, and what are the circumstances where the handbook can be used. And then it discusses about the humanitarian charter, which is basically the rules, the laws, existing laws with regard to humanitarian response, and the beliefs of the humanitarian professionals and humanitarian organizations in terms of humanitarian assistance. And then we go to the protection principles. You know about protection already. So it is basically a guidance on how humanitarian organization can um, ensure that people stay safe, access assistance, recover from violence, and claim their rights. And then comes to the core humanitarian standards. So there are a number of humanitarian actors with their active principle. So how do we bring them into one umbrella? How do we have a, common elements of such humanitarian ways of response? How do we have some common elements to it? So there are 9 such standards which enables them or helps them to uh, go by the go by one path of humanitarian assistance. And then, so these humanitarian charter, protection principles, and core humanitarian standards flows throughout the handbook. You will find it in all the minimum standards, and they make sure that these standards abide the core humanitarian standards, protection principles, and humanitarian charter, and it is they are being taken care of. And after that, we have 4 technical chapters which discusses the minimum standards. So minimum standards for wash, water supply, sanitation, hygiene promotion, food security and nutrition, shelter and settlement, and health. These are the 4 technical chapters which will be discussed in the handbook. So they are divided mainly as 4 segments, which will include the key actions in these minimum standards, what are the key indicators, what are the guideline notes, and you will have the appendix where you will see how do we exactly, what are the tools to perform that. For example, if it is a questionnaire, if it is a checklist, etc., etc. So if we go to the humanitarian charter, it basically discusses about the beliefs, roles, and existing laws. So it presents the ethical and legal foundation for the principles such as protection principles and core humanitarian standards, and also the minimum standards, which also has lights towards the partner standards. Partner standards might mean similarly to the Sphere handbook, we have livestock emergency guidelines, we have economic recovery guidelines, etc. Such global guidelines are also available. So it is in part a statement of established legal rights and also a shared belief, which the humanitarian charter discuss about. For example, the international humanitarian laws gives legal provision of protection against armed conflicts. So that's a legal statement there. So such kind of roles, beliefs, and legal actions are discussed in humanitarian charter. And protection principles comes out of the humanitarian charter. They support the rights set out in the humanitarian charter. Primarily, it is the responsibility of the authority to protect the rights. And as humanitarian professionals, we may encourage them and persuade them to fulfill the responses. And if it doesn't happen, we have to take measures on assisting the people in dealing with the consequences they faced out of the disaster which has occurred. And also on how humanitarian organization can help people to stay safe, access assistance, recover from violence, and claim their rights are being discussed in the protection principles. So they include child protection, gender-based violence, housing and property rights, legal counseling, refugee rights, etc., and more. And so these are the core 4 things which are discussed in the protection principles. And then the core humanitarian standards. You might have encountered with the core humanitarian standard on various forms, which is also a part of the Sphere handbook. So it is basically one standard divided into 9 different commitments. So there are a number of humanitarian activities with variety of principles, and some common elements are and ways of working are useful for promoting an effective response. So CHS basically, as I've told, 9 commitments to improve the quality and effectiveness of humanitarian assistance. And it also helps to help the affected people, and it also helps the donors to understand, the government to understand, the army to understand, the non-governmental organization. Well, these are all the people or the stakeholders, let me say, who uses this handbook. It is used by humanitarian professionals, NGOs, government, the affected people, academicians, etc. So these standards, for example, the humanitarian response is appropriate and relevant. is the first commitment out of the 9 commitments. So these standards lay the foundation for the minimum standards, the protection principles, and it's derived out of the humanitarian charter as well. So the CHS humanitarian charter and protection principles forms a strong foundation within the sphere handbooks and supports all technical standards. So what are those technical standards or the minimum standards? So here, out of the 4 technical standards, I will go little deep into the shelter and settlement sector, and basically trying to tell you that how the minimum standards are structured, where it will help you to have more easy access to it. So if you want something, if you want to immediately check if this particular thing is followed according to the standard, you can immediately go and check. So I'm giving you that support of check how the minimum standards can be referred to, as it is a very long handbook, and I suggest you all to read it at least once. So about the shelter and settlement, this chapter has basically planning, location and settlement, living space, household items, technical assistance, security of tenure, and environmental sustainability as different chapters to it. So basically, the whole concept is how to build back better. And shelter and settlement goes together. As you know, shelter is something within 4 walls, what you have your house with the household amenities you have, including the proper water, sanitation facilities, food and security, etc., livelihood opportunities. So that livelihood opportunities part, the settlement, the community where you are living at, provides them too. So these are to be looked at together. And in this handbook, they have in detail discussed about the urban settings, assistance requires, special, etc. So whenever you go for an urban settings, you always need to know more about it. Is entirely different from the rural setting, and as congested with more population density and construction, building constructions. So you have to know the laws there, building codes, and the density of population, the demography of the place, the irrigation channels, etc., etc. Such kind of things you have to know in terms of an urban sector. For example, you can just take the example of Mumbai or Hyderabad. So if you go to Hyderabad, the whole concept changes. You'll have to know that there are terms such as colonies, there are terms such as slums, there are terms such as streets. So when you are going for an assistance and if you need to do a rapid assessment, first of all, without knowing the whole concept of the settlements there, you will not be able to move in and do a sound relief operation there. So various such factors we'll have to consider when we discuss about the shelter and settlement sector. So choose assistance according to the categories of people affected is one core thing which we should focus on while we discuss about shelter and settlement. I will explain that with an example of Kerala. So when Kerala was affected by the devastating floods and landslides in the year 2018, Ernakulam, one of the district, was also very severely affected. And there is a settlement, a group of a community called in Chendamangalam who are handloom industrialists. So they make this handloom products, and the entire uh, enterprise of household enterprise was destroyed due to the floods. So as a recovery initiative, what some enthusiastic people started was, out of the saris which they have created, which they have made out of handloom, was converted into small dolls called chekutis. And these dolls were sold for example, say like one security for 20 or 50 rupees like that were sold to help them recover from the disaster. And these securities were bought by lot many people, like lot many NGOs, lot many corporates, government, etc., for higher prices as well. And that literally helped them to get out of the disaster. And so for that community, recovering their livelihood in any possible way was most important. So we should plan according to the kind of settlement and categories of people who are affected by a disaster. And the minimum standards should not be applied in isolation as well. Say, for example, right to shelter is also linked to right to water and sanitation. So they, and also the right to health. So these go in interchangeably. So they have to be used together and not in isolation in any case, whatever be the standard you are following it. And when you say linkage and the humanitarian charter we have discussed, and we have also discussed about international law specifically protecting the right to adequate shelter. So such kind of laws we have, and so we have to look at certain such factors. That's how reading humanitarian charter and core humanitarian standards and protection principles thoroughly before going through the minimum standards is as important as it is. So as you can see, what the shelter provides, it provides protection from the weather, it helps in livelihoods, it helps in security, health. And when you say livelihoods, um, there was another case in where before the recovery and after the release, there is a phase called early recovery or early development phase, where if you see during the humanitarian assistance, the response phase, uh, when people are shifted to relief camps, they are provided with cooked food, right? They're provided with cooked food then. And immediately after a week, also, let's say you provide them with cooked food. Okay. And after a month also, you provide them with cooked food again. What will happen? They will not be able to recover by themselves. So what you have to do is you help them recover from the disaster by supporting in different ways and supporting in their livelihood. How do you recover their livelihood? If they are self-sustainable, if their livelihood is recovered, then the recovery process, the entire recovery process will be much faster. So first, you help them to clean up their homes. Say, for example, if it is floods, it will be there will be sludges and all. So you help them to clean their home, and you pay for that. And in the first week, you provide them cooked food. Next week, you provide them raw food so that they can cook by themselves. And then you provide them the small employment opportunities where for cleaning their house, you get this much. For cleaning your fields, you get this much per day. Slowly, their livelihood will also get recovered, and also they will have an income in hand, and they will be moving on by themselves. So that's the advantage of following such standards and such returns, such standards in general. So when you say about this, so with respect to shelter, the pre-crisis context of the settled population, and uh, when the crisis impacts, there are three kind of post-crisis settlement scenarios. One is the non-displaced population, where owner-occupied accommodation or land could be there, could be rental accommodation, or could be informally occupied accommodation or land, or could be displaced populations where rental, hostel arrangements, hosted arrangements, and also communal settlements. And also, and the third category will be the indirect indirectly affected population. So for them, it will be the host population, who needs the relief, shelter assistance and all. So they are also a category of people who are affected indirectly due to the crisis. So selection of assistance and option of implementations. So when we plan our assistance, we need to consider these three kind of post settlement scenarios, and we should study the area where, okay, these are the areas where we need to focus upon and find durable solution for the situation. So when we say, that's how this chapter is being divided. As you see, the first process is planning, and then you move to location and settlement planning. Then how living space can be managed, household items can be provided, what are the technical assistance which we need to provide, and security of tenure and environmental sustainability. Here I will go to the plan once again. Sorry, the handbook. I'll just stop share and share the handbook to you of this particular chapter. When you say, yeah, shelter and settlement. So here we have the first chapter as planning. So how this chapter is constructed. So there are some key actions. When you say planning, you have to work with the affected population and understand what kind of shelter they require, and understand from the national and local authorities their cultural differences, etc. So if you build flats in a village affected by an earthquake, they're not going to live there. So that's not simply their culture. And what are the key indicators for those actions, and then the guidance notes. That's how each chapter is structured. And at the end, you will have the appendix, where basically the tools which you can use for such studies. So for example, you want to know the cultural differences of that particular area, the demographics, the risk there involved. So there are set of questions where, if you are doing a project in some place to understand the vulnerability of that area, or say for example you are visiting a disaster affected area and you will have to conduct a study there. So these are the questions, potential questions you can add on to your questionnaire for the assessment. And also the checklist, various, so to have a check on, for example, settlement scenario, hosted arrangement, what exactly is hosted arrangement, what are the examples for it, etc. You will encounter in this appendix. So similarly, we have water supply and sanitation, where we talk about hygiene promotion, water supply, excreta management, solid waste management, vector control, and this wash and disease outbreaks and healthcare settings is an additional chapter, which from the last handbook which they have added, and which also helps in terms of the pandemic situation we face. So such kind of aspects are also being added to it, and they have said in the new handbook we'll have more about the pandemic situation we have faced just now, or we are facing. And then comes to food security and nutrition here, which is also a very important aspect. These four are the core. They consider four are the core sectors to be focused upon. So basically, each chapter will have the first one as planning, or let's say assessments. So before going towards the relief operations, we will have to study the affected area properly. So in 2018, when the Kerala floods happened, or during the Amphan cyclone hit the West Bengal and parts of Odisha, uh, these standards were used, where organizations and government came together to conduct joint detailed needs assessment and joint rapid needs assessment, which is multi-sectorial and also conducted by not one single entity, but by multiple entity with multiple expertise. Say, for example, organization A is having expertise in wash, organization B is having expertise in full-time shelter, organization C is having expertise in animal welfare. For animal welfare, you have livestock emergency guidelines and standards. So such kind of multiple organizations and multi-stakeholders come together and plan the relief operations and conduct the relief activities. So that's how these standards help them to come together and have a unified response strategy planned out and executed. So health has a lot of revisions in it, including the communicable diseases, and especially the communicable diseases, and also, yeah, communicable diseases is given more importance and something additional in the health standards. Yeah. So this is basically a very brief about the sphere standards, and for you to access these standards, there are multiple ways you can access the website of sphere standards and get these PDFs downloaded, or you can buy the hard copy as well. But if you visit this app, this has sphere standards and also the partner standards, which I have told you about. So all these standards you can access in your mobile, and it is a very user-friendly app, uh, like what you say, um, using Kindle. So like Kindle and all, you can use it very simply and understand. Whenever you want to refer to some standards, you can simply go through the app and have a look at it. And these are some extra tools to remember. Obviously, the HSPAS and ALNAP is helps you with a lot of reference evaluations, case studies, lessons learned, etc. Also, Group ERD is another similar platform with a research, evaluation, and training in humanitarian action. And also, if you go to the sphere standards.org, you will find training courses. As if you want to be a sphere trainer, you can do that. If you want to be if you want to learn the entire handbook, there are training programs, online courses available, which are completely free. You can access to them and learn more about these standards. So that's it for me for today. You can reach out to me in the following email or my uh, mobile number whenever you need any help or any queries with respect to this. If it is up to my knowledge, I'll try to respond. And have a nice day and enjoy your day. Thank you so much.